Danger is absolutely everywhere in the world, not just in New York City. But if you're moving to New York City, you might be a little bit concerned about the danger here, and you're probably looking for a way to make sure that you're safe here. Now, I do have to say, I've been living in New York City for quite some time, and luckily, I've never run into a dangerous encounter here, but you do hear about it in the news all the time. Now, let's stop and think about it. Why do you hear about danger in the news all the time? The reason why is because it makes great news. And the reason why something is covered in the news is because it's out of the norm and it's not happening all the time. So I want you to keep that in mind. But if you're moving to New York City right now, you're probably hearing from friends and family to be careful or stay safe. And I get it. And this is something that I think that you should definitely do here, and something that you should do anywhere in the world, really. So what are some safety tips that you can use to make sure that you stay safe here? The first thing I want you to do before you move to New York City, if you can, is visit the neighborhood that you plan to move in person. Now, why do I say to do this? A neighborhood can be very, very different during the daytime than it can be at nighttime, and vice versa. So I always recommend, if the person can, that they visit the neighborhood during the day, at night, literally all times of the day, so that they can see exactly what it's going to look like at all those different times. Not only is that just a safety tip, but it also goes for if that neighborhood fits your lifestyle based on what it looks like at all these different times of the day. So this is something that I definitely want you to do if you can. If you can't get there in person, I highly recommend asking people online or looking online to see exactly what other people are saying about the neighborhood during that time of day. Now, as always, you need to be very, very careful early in the morning, like very early in the morning, like when it's still dark out, and late at night, of course. And like I've been saying, that really goes for anywhere in the world. But of course, more things are going to be likely to happen very, very late in the night and very, very early in the morning when no one else is around. So be careful with that. If you're coming to New York City in your prime going out phase, it's very hard to not be out and about late at night or early in the morning. It's going to happen. That's why you're here in New York City. But I do want you to keep that in mind. Be careful if you're alone walking around during those times, and just watch out for your surroundings. Now, when you're in New York City, you're going to get used to which streets and avenues tend to have more people on them during certain times of the day. I would say if you're walking around late at night or just at a time when no one else is around, be careful what streets and avenues that you walk on. Now, typically the avenues are going to have more people on them because avenues are going to be much bigger than streets. Streets are off avenues. So you're going to see a lot more people walking around on the avenues. So you might feel safer trying to walk through the avenues instead of just cutting through a bunch of the side streets. Depending on where you're going in New York City, you're probably going to have to walk down some streets. Just be mindful of, is anybody else on the street? Or are you going to feel isolated on the street and like something can happen to you or someone can approach you because no one else is around? So just keep that in mind. If you are new to New York City, I know it's kind of hard to get a grasp of that, but once you're here, you'll learn very, very quickly which streets and avenues tend to have a lot of people on them. When I was going out late at night, that was something that I always did. I would always kind of think back to which way I'm going to walk and which way would be the safest for me to go, where there would be also other people like me walking down those streets and avenues. My next recommendation is going to sound a little intense. Try not to make eye contact with people on the street. Now, I know that sounds extremely off-putting and rude, but New Yorkers get a reputation of being unfriendly and rude. But I think what it actually is people aren't rude here. Everyone just doesn't want to be bothered or approached by other people. It has nothing to do with not being friendly and making eye contact. It really just has something to do with people are going to be more likely to come up to you and harass you if you're making eye contact with them. Everybody knows that. So when I'm walking around the streets of New York City by myself and I clearly don't want to be bothered by anybody, I make sure I'm not making eye contact with people, because the minute you make eye contact with somebody who is looking for trouble, they're going to be more likely to approach you, I would say. So I'm not saying for you to be unfriendly. I'm definitely not saying that. And I don't want this to be confused as that. It's literally just a way to protect yourself from random people coming up to you or feeling like they can approach you. Now, if this makes you feel more comfortable, you can also carry mace on you, pepper spray, or they actually have these like keychains that are like alarm systems. You can basically like pull a lever or a button on your keychain and it will kind of like sound this like noise that would probably scare somebody off. There's all these different types of safety things nowadays. And there's been times in New York City history where sales for these safety items have gone up tremendously just because people hear something in the news and they'd feel more safe carrying something. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Make sure what you're carrying in New York City is legal, because what could be legal wherever you're from might not be legal in New York City. So just watch out for that, because you don't want to get yourself in trouble just because you're trying to protect yourself. But there are also a lot of things and safety devices that you can use that are completely legal. And I've always carried one or the other with me at all times, pretty much in New York City. So I always recommend walking in groups if you can. And I still do this to this day. Now, I know that's a lot easier said than done, because there's going to be plenty of times where you're in New York City by yourself and you don't have anyone to walk with. So I get it. And I know that this piece of advice isn't always going to work. But if you can, as much as you can, try to walk around in groups, because people are just going to be way less likely to approach you if you're with other people. So if you're going out late at night or coming back early in the morning, if you can, try to be with someone else, because of course it's just going to be safer for you. Now, when you are walking around or trying to go back to your apartment late at night, I would say try to avoid walking as much as you can. Now, I know you're probably going to have to walk to the subway or the bus station or wherever you're going, but I would try to take a train or bus closer to where you are so you can avoid walking as much as possible. I know that you can't always do that, but on the trains, you're gonna have more people on there. And now, even on the subways, you do have to be careful late at night, because being at the subway stations late at night, depending on what station you're at, can be brutal. I've done it way too many times, and you will see all kinds of stuff happening late at night, and you definitely want to avoid it if you can. I would also say try to go to a main subway station versus kind of like a local station if you can, because there's gonna be more people at the express stops than the local stops late at night. And some of the locals don't even run very late at night, so it depends where you're trying to go. If you can afford it, I always say try to take a car back or a taxi, just because it's better than taking the public transportation. And sometimes the problem isn't actually the public transportation at night, it's waiting at the bus stops or waiting at the subway station. It's even probably more dangerous than actually being on the public transportation. So if you can't afford a cab, taxi, Uber, Lyft, I would say take that. It's hard when you're coming to New York City, especially if you're young and you don't have a lot of money. And that was something that I ran into when I was young, is that I could not afford to be taking these cabs all around the city. So I was relying on public transportation a lot late at night, when I probably shouldn't have been. But I do understand if you're dealing with this as well, because it's something very, very common. If you're going to the main public transportation stations like Penn Station, Port Authority, Grand Central, there are going to be some people there that will harass you. I would say Grand Central, they've kind of cracked down on Grand Central over the past like 10 years. So that one's gotten a little bit better, but Penn Station and Port Authority, you'll still see all kinds of people there at night. And that's when my eye contact advice comes into play, when you're avoiding people and don't want to look at them in the eye because you just don't want people to come up to you. Now, you will see sometimes security or police around there, but it's just so common to see all different types of people at these major transportation hubs that they don't really do anything about it. And honestly, unless something really big happens, they kind of just look the other way. So it's something to keep in mind if you can avoid these big stations late at night, because it's just not pleasant and there's just all different types of people around there. So I hope this helped you figure out how to be safe in New York City. Now, I really don't want you to be scared when you're living here, because the things that you see in the news are in the news for a reason, because they don't happen as much as you think they do. And I think that people watching the news and hearing about New York City, especially people that don't live here, they think that New York City is the scariest place in the world because they hear all this stuff happening. And they need to remember that they're hearing it because it's honestly rare enough to make the news. I want you to think about it like that. I don't want you to be scared when you live here, but I do want you to be safe. Now, I would love to hear from you guys. Do you guys have any safety tips that I didn't cover in this video? As always, I just love hearing from you guys.